The husband
and says the May deadline is achievable. The High Court clears the way for the rearrest of drug suspects. 2 are missing. 10 years jail for sexual abuse for a star of a priest's cabaret. Good evening and welcome. A new initiative to restructure the Stormont talks has been agreed in an effort to speed up progress. A small working group of ministers and party leaders has been set up with the purpose of trying to identify areas where agreement is possible. It hopes to report to a full session of the talks in 2 weeks' time. If successful, the development may pave the way for detailed discussions on a possible political formula in time for the May deadline.
After the bitter rows yesterday, the talks quickly got down to business this morning when, on a suggestion from the chairman, the party leaders convened a small working group to try to speed the process up. With up to 70 delegates attending plenary sessions, the feeling was they'd become unwieldy.
We welcome this because we have always taken the view that having generalised discussions in a large group of 40 to 60 people was not the way to proceed. That it would be better to focus on specific issues and to operate in a smaller context, leaving, of course, space for bilaterals as appropriate. And it may be possible, therefore, although probably not until January, for the talks to actually start seeing if there are specific issues which can be agreed.
Mr Trimble brushed off suggestions that the development could bring him into closer proximity to Sinn Féin. Gerry Adams said he welcomed the move, but political will, he said, and not any new format would move the talks on. John Hume said the process was approaching key issues.
Well, today is a positive development, and I hope that we will make it even more positive by swiftly coming to an agreement, because in the papers already submitted there's a lot of areas of agreement among the parties.
While George Mitchell exercised his renowned political caution.
I would characterize it as getting down to brass tacks. I wouldn't characterize it yet as a breakthrough, but I think it sets in motion a series of events that could lead to what I hope will be a breakthrough.
And David Andrews, relieved to have some good news after a difficult period, said the new format would inject a note of urgency.
Today, as I say, was a good day, and I think marked a new beginning. A new departure in the negotiations. We're, I believe, down to the nitty-gritty of what we're here about.
Over the next 2 weeks, the party leaders will try to identify the key points that have been blocking these talks and agree a way of dealing with them. Then, they hope, the parties can come back in the new year and get down to full-scale negotiations. David Davenpower, RTE News, Stormont Castle Buildings.
Tony Blair has welcomed today's initiative. He said an advance had been made and he looked forward to evidence of progress by Christmas. Tonight, the Prime Minister told our London correspondent Brian O'Connell that he believed his deadline of next May for a conclusion of the negotiations was achievable.
We have a May deadline and I believe that we can meet it, but I think that the announcement that there's been now that there is going to be agreement on the key issues to be resolved is itself quite a step forward. Because if you can get some form of heads of agreement on the bones of a final settlement, then it's easier to put some flesh on them.
One of the main bones of contention between the Irish government and the Ulster Unions is this question of cross-border bodies. Bertie Ahern talks about they must have transparency in function. David Andrews referred to governmental powers. That created a big fuss with the Ulster Unions. How would you, in shorthand, describe what sort of powers any cross-border bodies should have?
Well, I think the precise nature of the powers and purposes of it is something that's there for discussion. But, you see, most people agree there's got to be some form of devolved government in Northern Ireland. There's got to be some form of cross-border cooperation because there are issues of clear mutual interest to be discussed, because that's the right thing to do. And there's got to be some form of intergovernmental machinery, east and west, between the Irish and British governments.
But not governmental powers, as David Andrews was suggesting. That's...
Well, I think David Andrews himself withdrew that phrase. And what I would say to people is that, you know, you're going to get these situations in the course of a negotiation as difficult as this, where someone says something and a word or a nuance is in the wrong place and everyone, you know, goes up and is concerned about it. You've really just got to keep your eye the whole time on the big picture.
Gerry Adams is coming here to see you next week. Obviously, Conservatives, Ulster Unionists have expressed grave reservations about this. Some say it's very premature, that they suggest the ceasefire won't hold. Isn't there a danger that by trying to keep Sinn Féin at the table, somebody else, for example the Ulster Unionists, are going to walk out the other door?
Well, it is a delicate negotiation all the way through, I agree. But you know, if Sinn Féin are participants in the talks, then they should be treated as proper participants in the talks. And that means they are afforded the same facilities as other participants. Now, if Sinn Féin or anybody else goes back to violence, that's it. They're out of the process.
The Taoiseach has distanced the government from the controversial remarks by the Minister for Foreign Affairs on the proposed North-South body. Mr Ahern told the Dáil Mr Andrews had gone further than the coalition's position when he said the body would function not unlike a government.
David Andrews' remarks sparked unionist calls for his resignation or his replacement at the Northern talks. And although he pulled back from a statement yesterday, their anger has not been assuaged.
It was very difficult for me to continue that dialogue with the Irish government against that background. Now, they having created the problem, the Irish government, through its foreign minister, having got things into a hole, I have to wait for them to get out of the hole. And there's a limit to how much I can help them to do so.
In the Dáil, the Taoiseach told deputies the minister had clarified his comments, but then went on to distance the government from what Mr Andrews had said.
I think what Minister Andrews stated was going further than what the position is, and he has clarified that himself. And what I've said earlier is the position. And I'm very conscious that every word that is uttered in the Northern talks is important.
However, opposition deputies weren't satisfied.
Is the Taoiseach taking any action to ensure that the Minister for Foreign Affairs is aware of the sensitivity of his brief?
Remarks on Friday by Deputy Andrews, Minister for Foreign Affairs, were unfortunate and very unhelpful, and could have been avoided had Deputy Andrews stuck to the script.
Could I ask the Taoiseach if he would not agree that he should be insisting with the Minister for Foreign Affairs that it is the last time that such a mistake will be made?
The Taoiseach said Mr Andrews had been dealing with unionists at the Northern talks today, and referring to the controversial North-South body, he said it would operate like an EU Council of Ministers, with each country fully accountable in their own jurisdiction for decisions made.
Decisions can only be taken by consensus, and there will be no mechanism enabling a combined nationalist majority, north or south, to override strenuously held unionist views without their agreement.
Donald Kelly, RTE News, Leinster House.